In July 2011, 32-year-old Rebecca Zahau was found hanging from a balcony in a mansion that she shared with her boyfriend, Jonah Shacknai. She was naked and gagged, with her ankles and wrists bound. Despite this, her death was declared suicide. Let's take a deep dive into this case. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Robin, and this is my channel. I typically am trying to do crime videos right now in my crime series. And today I'm focusing on a case that is unsolved, honestly, in my opinion. This case is really interesting and it literally gives me the chills. I feel like the public never really got to hear the full story of what happened to this girl. And I just want to clarify, like, nothing about this case and its results make sense to me. And so I'm going to go through it piece by piece and pretty much dissect the entire case. The case we are talking about today is the case of Rebecca Zahau. Rebecca Zahau was born on March 15th, 1979 in northwestern Burma. During that time, her country that she was living in with her family was going through a very warlike, tumultuous moment, and so her family actually decided to relocate. She was a Burmese immigrant and she moved to several countries where she learned to speak multiple languages. She spoke English, Nepali, and Hindi, and she lived in multiple countries like Germany, Nepal, and eventually the United States. As Rebecca grew up, she ended up meeting her first husband, Neil Nalepa, and they met while attending the Calvary Chapel Bible College in Austria. However, their relationship didn't really last long. They got married, but they separated, and she eventually moved to the United States. She worked as an ophthalmic, I cannot pronounce it, an ophthalmic technician until 2010. At some point during her time, she met Jonah Shacknai. She met him at her job as she was working in the medical field, and he was a wealthy CEO of a company called Medicis Pharmaceutical. He was a millionaire who mainly resided in Arizona, but also regularly vacationed at the Sparkles Mansion in Coronado, California. He had been married twice before dating Rebecca. From his first marriage, he had 2 teenagers, and from his second marriage, he had a child who was 6 years old, and his name was Max Shacknai. And I am mentioning this because this becomes very important. His child, Max Shacknai, becomes very important to this story. So like I was saying before, in 2010, Rebecca ended up quitting her job, and this was in order to move to Coronado with Jonah and just to spend more time with him and his children. The older teenagers actually resented Rebecca, but she was more often with Max, who was the 6-year-old. She was really responsible for his care. She did things like she took him to and from soccer practice. She fixed food for him, she would read to him, and I mean, they were pretty close and they got along pretty well. So this is where the real details of the case come in. On July 11th, 2011, Rebecca was at the mansion in Coronado with her younger sister, Zena, who was 13 at the time, and Max. She was the only adult in the household at the time and was supposed to be watching the children. However, things quickly took a turn for the worse. Somehow, 6-year-old Max ended up falling from the banister on the 2nd floor of the mansion. Apparently, this fall was not witnessed by anyone in the home at the time, and there were no accounts of anyone describing what really had happened. All we know is that Max was found with brain damage, fractured facial bones, and a spinal cord injury. At the scene where he had fallen, he had a razor scooter resting on his leg and several soccer balls nearby. And so it could have been either of those that honestly caused the accident. We don't know because no one was really there. Strangely enough, the chandelier hanging from the ceiling was noted to be broken, he might have fallen into it or hit it. But that's also very strange. That could be its whole other video of what happened to him, but it's very strange because he would have had to have kind of I don't know, lurched himself over, and so it's very strange the way he died. But yeah, he was very, very badly injured, and unfortunately his injuries became fatal. He actually died on July 16th from brain damage sustained from his injuries. At the time of the incident, Rebecca says she was in the bathroom and she found Max moments after his fall had happened. Her little sister called the authorities immediately. That was her side of the story, and his death was ruled to be an accident. Now, that accident had happened on July 11th. On July 12th, Rebecca went to the airport to drop off her 13 13-year-old sister who was going on a flight back to Missouri. She then picked up her boyfriend's brother, Adam Shacknai, who had just arrived on a flight from Memphis. So later that evening, Rebecca, her boyfriend Jonah, her boyfriend's brother Adam, and their friend Howard ate dinner together and returned back to the house. And there were reports of loud music coming from the house that night. Adam Shacknai stayed at the house. Jonah Shacknai had actually been supposedly at Max's bedside with Max's mother, Dina Romano, at that time. He was said to have only left the hospital once to go to McDonald's. So now we are getting into the actual nitty-gritty of this case. The next morning rolls around and this is when everything goes down. Adam Shacknai states that he wakes up in the morning and he finds Rebecca nude, hanging from a balcony with her wrists and ankles bound. Her hands were bound behind her back. This was at 6:45 a.m. on the morning of July 13th. He called 911 at 6:48 a.m. and then sent a text message to his brother to inform him of what happened. He cuts the body down prior to the police's arrival and attempts CPR. To give you an idea of how she was hung, the rope was tied to a metal bed frame on one end, and then on the other end it was fashioned into a noose, and she basically launched herself, supposedly launched herself over the balcony. I'm going to insert a clip of that 911 call here.
Clear an emergency, what are you reporting? Yeah, I got a girl on herself. Okay, sir, is she still alive? Is she alive? Well, last time we saw her. Last night. Okay, is she beyond help? No, I'm compressing chest right now. Okay, hold on. What's your name? Adam Shacknai. Okay, listen to me. Help is coming.
So I'm listening to this, and what I hear is actually pretty concerning once you think about it. He literally says she hung herself. And when you think of the crime scene, like if you found someone and their arms were tied up, their hands were tied up, their legs were tied up, their face was gagged, you know, then they were hanging, I think the first instinct would be that someone had did that to them, not that they had did it to themselves. Like, even if they did do it to themselves, that wouldn't be my first thought. It would be like, oh my god, someone did this to them, you know? It's kind of like whose first thought is that, oh my god, she killed herself. Like, she's all tied up and she killed herself, you know? Like, he suggested himself. So that's really concerning to me. Another thing is that he says like, oh, I'm doing CPR, but he doesn't really sound like he's doing it. Like, you know, it takes like a lot of pressure and a lot of power to do CPR. I'm like doing it with big hand motions. And he doesn't really sound like he's making those motions or doing them. Like, it doesn't sound like he's really doing it. He just sounds like he's kind of pretending, you know, he's asking her if she's dead. Like, clearly, if she's not breathing and you're that close to the body and presumably she's been dead for a certain amount of time, like, you would know she's dead, like not responding. It's very strange to me, like his actions, his reaction to finding her body. Just nothing seems right here is basically what I'm trying to say. So I mentioned she was gagged, and she was gagged with a blue long sleeve t-shirt, and it was wrapped around her head with the sleeves double knotted and stuffed into her mouth. There was also what appeared to be tape residue on her legs. I mentioned earlier that her legs and her arms were bound, and I think it's important for me to mention that the knots that she was bound with were like expert level knots. I watched tons and tons of videos of professionals, like professional knot tiers or just professionals in general, like forensic investigators, and they're trying to imitate the way she had tied herself up. And it's very, very hard to do. Even when they try to do it themselves, like even if they get the knot in the first place, putting it behind your back like yourself is very hard for them, and it proves to be very hard for them. They say that the knots are consistent with dock knot tying, which is like, you know, kind of like people who go on boats. They know how to tie knots like that. And just an FYI, the only person who was in the house with her that night, Adam Shacknai, is a tugboat captain. I just want you guys to keep that in your mind. And so I'm sure he'd be capable of at least having the knowledge to create those knots. But yes, Rebecca was pronounced dead at the scene. The police initiated forensic and toxicology testing on her body as a part of the autopsy. And, you know, they were just trying to determine the cause of her death, but quickly speculations of foul play began to circulate. Unfortunately, investigators were unable to find any other DNA on the scene besides Rebecca's. On September 2nd, the San Diego County Sheriff's Department formally announced their finding that she had committed suicide. Now, just imagine this. Imagine you want to kill yourself, and so what are you going to do? Are you just going to like do it, or are you going to tie your legs, tie your arms, or tie your wrists behind your back, gag yourself, and then somehow force yourself over a balcony railing to kill yourself? Like, would you really do all of that? Oh wait, and let's not forget that she was nude. She stripped herself naked. That just seems like a very strange thing to do. I find that that makes zero sense. There's zero logic in that. I have honestly never heard of anyone doing that, but apparently, you know, it's happened apparently. So let me just get more into that. The police defended themselves, saying, you know, there are documentations of incidences throughout the country where people have secured their feet and hands as a way to commit suicide to prevent them from changing their minds. You know, they even acted this out. Like, they went as far as showing video demonstration in which, you know, a woman wrapped a rope around her hand several times in front of her, slipped the hand out and the binding, put her hands behind her back, rebound them, and it shows that she tightened the bindings with an aid of a string, pretty similar to the one in which was found in Rebecca's hands. So that's their excuse for kind of like wrapping this up and being like, oh, it's suicide. Now onto her actual autopsy. It was found that she had 4 instances of head trauma. And this means that there were at least 4 separate times in which her head was impacted in some way. And this does not make sense at all for suicide hanging. I just want to say that right now. She didn't jump to her death and hit concrete. Like, she was hanging. My thought is that someone hit her in the head, or maybe we're in the process of choking her and like slamming her head down. That's my theory. So San Diego medical examiner Jonathan Lucas stated that because there was evidence that she went over the balcony in a non-vertical position, she may have struck her head on the balcony on the way down. And so I can see that happening. Like, yeah, you know, you might have hit your head once, maybe even twice if it was just like a wild hit, but 4 times just seems like too much. I feel like that would explain maybe like 2 instances of head trauma, but 4, I don't know. Now, forensic consultant and doctor of criminal psychology Maurice Godwin says, the chances of bumping into the railing, going over the balcony, and hitting your head 4 times is highly unlikely, which is what I think. There was also a second autopsy done, and this was by the request of Rebecca Zahau's family. This was done by pathologist Dr. Cyril Weck. I don't know how to say his last name. So what he found was that she had fractures in her neck, and this was previously thought to be from her hanging herself. But he states that he believes that they were from manual strangulation and that someone had murdered Rebecca. To me, that makes so much more sense because first of all, like I was saying earlier, why would she get naked, gag herself, tie her wrists and her feet before hanging herself? And is that even possible? Like, is that even physically possible to do all of that? I don't know. So it would make so much more sense that someone was choking her, banging her head, like a violent action. Maybe she was fighting them. And then they staged this hanging. I feel like very typically, like in all cases that are unsolved and impossible to solve, it's because the police investigation work was terrible. Like, they did not do their jobs correctly. So it has been also shown that there were inaccuracies and evidence that may have shown that she was sexually assaulted. I mean, she was naked. I just don't know why this wasn't like the first thought that someone could have sexually assaulted her and murdered her. There was evidence also found on the scene which police kind of like, I feel like they looked over it, you know? For instance, there was a message in black paint on the door leading to the balcony from where her body was found, and it said, "She saved him, can he save her?" Which makes very little sense, but apparently the police took it as a suicide note. Now, the reason they took it as a suicide note is because she liked to paint, but her siblings say that the message did not match her handwriting, nor was it something that she would write. A handwriting expert actually testified that the message was most likely written by a right-handed 6-foot-tall male. And I just want to say that Rebecca was 5'3". So I just feel like everything's very inconclusive, but that doesn't sound like a suicide note to me. And so there's also her phone. There was a lot of information on her phone, actually. She had talked and texted with her older sister, Mary Zahau, who confirmed that Zena had arrived home safely. Then at 10:48 p.m., she received a text from Nina Romano, who is the twin sister of Shacknai's ex-wife, Dina Romano. And she stated that she wanted to stop by the house and speak with her about Max's accident. Rebecca did not actually reply to that message. It was also shown that she checked her voicemail a few hours later, around 12:50 a.m. She listened to a message, and police stated that it was a message regarding the worsening of Max's condition. They declined to confirm who left the message, but the older sister, Mary Zahau, she stated that police told her it was from Jonah Shacknai. The message was deleted, and so basically the police and her family, they never got to hear the contents of that message. The police did not request that AT&T try to retrieve the deleted messages from its servers either, so they kind of messed up there as well. I just noticed that the police were constantly and consistently dismissing very important information in this case. So much so that it seems very blatant. I mean, these deaths drew so much media attention. When I say deaths, I mean Max's death and Rebecca's death. I'm talking international coverage, so I mean, the police faced a ton of backlash for their handling of the case. And Rebecca's being dismissed as a suicide, and I think it's rightfully so, honestly, because they just messed up. They dismissed too much important evidence, like evidence that could have changed this whole case around, and they just were like, suicide. Oh, it was suicide. And I just feel like there's just something so wrong with that. Now, strangely enough, on April 4th of 2018, a San Diego, California civil jury awarded $5 million in damages to the family of Rebecca Zahau. And guess what that determined? It determined that Jonah Shacknai's brother, Adam, was liable for her death. Now, Adam was actually very extensively interviewed, and he even took a lie detector test. Unfortunately, the results of that were inconclusive, but the police believed he was telling the truth and did not order further testing. But the polygraph operator did recommend further testing, so. My theory, as I've obviously stated, is that the brother did it. When I really think about it, it's very suspicious. I mean, he was the only one in the house with her at the time, and this is right after, you know, his nephew's hospitalized in very dire conditions, and this is something that happened under Rebecca's care. So maybe he felt a certain kind of way and did this to her. I just find it very suspicious. He didn't hear anything. He didn't see anything. There was no DNA evidence, which makes no sense because there should be some kind of DNA evidence. I mean, he was picked up by her. They had dinner together. They were in the house alone for a period of time together. For there to be no DNA evidence, like maybe not even his, and I don't know if when they say no DNA evidence, they mean like nothing that they can convict a person on, or like no DNA evidence at all. If there's no DNA evidence at all, then someone had to clean up that crime scene, because it just doesn't make sense that there wouldn't be any of his DNA on her. Simple as that. I just feel like the lack of DNA just means someone cleaned up the crime scene. And also, we're talking about incredibly rich people. Rich people pay people off all the time. They pay the police off. We've seen it before. It's happened before. And I honestly believe just by how badly the case was handled, this was a cover-up. And It just makes no sense otherwise. Everything that I'm saying is just my opinion, how I feel. It's not truth, fact yet. Actually, I mean, they won the civil lawsuit, so this is still just going to be my opinion. I'm not trying to get in any trouble or ruffle any feathers or have anyone contacting me. So that's my opinion on this case. Tell me what you guys think of this case. I found this case very interesting, and shout out to my girl Kim for suggesting that I cover this case. I really want to bring attention to this case because, to me, until something is done to confirm that this person harmed her, and until it is found out, because no one believes it's suicide. There's no way anyone really believes it's suicide. I just want justice for her and for her family so they can like have that kind of peace. Guys, comment down below what you think about this case. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and as always, I love you guys and I will see you next time. Thank you guys so much for watching. Bye.